Hello everyone. A very interesting interview was conducted by Kung Fu Kingdom featuring Roger Yuan, who is the stunt coordinator in Denis Villeneuve's Dune. He reveals some very interesting details about what we are going to see in the Dune movie. The interviewer Ramon Youssef seems familiar with the Dune book because his questions are quite detailed, and this is something quite refreshing because we don't normally get interview questions that are in depth, that show a deep level of understanding of Dune. So this article is going to contain spoilers, so if you do not wish to be spoiled, please watch other videos of mine, because this will reveal some elements that will occur in Denis Villeneuve's Dune movie. So the interviewer mentions that there are many fighting styles detailed in the Dune book, and he asks Roger how did he go about developing the fighting systems for the film. Roger reveals that there were 3 systems that he was initially asked to work on. Fighting styles for the Emperor's Guard, the Sardaukar, the Atreides, and the Harkonnen. Those were the first 3 that he was asked to work on. Then he adds that Paul Atreides, aka Timothée Chalamet in Denis Villeneuve's Dune movie, and his teaching the Fremen doesn't occur yet because that's going to come in the second film. Now what they're referring to here is the Weirding Way, as taught to Paul Atreides by his mother Jessica. The Weirding Way is a Bene Gesserit technique. So we may get to see echoes of it and instances of it, but we're not going to see the full fighting style of the Weirding Way in Dune Part 1. But what Roger is saying here is that we're going to see it in the second film. And that makes sense if you know where the first film ends, which you can check out in my other videos. So Roger goes into detail in this interview, and it's something that we haven't really gotten since the movie was announced. We haven't really had an in-depth discussion about the types of things, the workings, the machinations of anything really in this film. We didn't even hear it in the behind the scenes that was released with the trailer. We just got very simple, very broad explanations of things. So this interview was pretty interesting, full of substance and meaty. It had a lot of information in it, and it's something I want to cover with you now. Before we get to it, if you like these kinds of videos, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and click the bell so that you can be first to be notified of new videos. I would also really appreciate support on my Patreon, and you can become a channel member where you'll receive access to exclusive content and more. Now that is out of the way, let us get back to it. It seems that the 3 fighting styles that Roger Yuan has worked on are quite distinct from each other, and that's something really interesting. The Atreides, their weapons are like shorter swords, according to Roger. So he's given the Atreides the Filipino styles of Kali and Eskrima, which is fantastic to hear. And this is something I was secretly hoping for. I was hoping for those styles particularly among the Fremen, but the fact that the Atreides have these styles is a very interesting development because it almost links back to their history in certain ways. And I'm not talking about the Greek side of things, I'm talking about the Caucasian side of things. The link to the Chechen themes of the Atreides with their kinjals, etc. Roger Yuan elaborates by saying that the Atreides are very precise and they have techniques that work specifically for the weapons that they use, so they are very methodical and precise. Roger then describes the Sardaukar, the Emperor's Guard, as a cross between Viking berserkers and the samurai. They work more like a group, so their style should be a very brutal yet skilled fighting style. And finally, he describes the Harkonnen because of their bestial and sadistic quality that he describes. He likens them to the barbarians of old, like Genghis Khan and the Mongols, even in the way that they move. In his words, they're efficient, but they're not very precise or stylized, which is really interesting because that means that the Harkonnen style isn't very calculated. It's more crazed and wild and chaotic. He says that those are the 3 kinds of systems that we wanted to identify, and that will hopefully give the audience something pleasing to look at and something to take away from. Then Roger gives us even more. He talks about the Weirding Way and says that Rebecca Ferguson, who plays Paul Atreides' mother, has a scene where she's training him about the hidden blade, and for him to survive, he has to rely on the Bene Gesserit way of fighting. This is a scene that he's specifically talking about, and he doesn't know whether or not it made its way into the film, which confirms that he himself hasn't seen the film. But from other reports, Jason Momoa has seen the film twice. He's then asked how much creative freedom did Denis Villeneuve give him in crafting the fight action, training and choreography. And he answers by saying that Denis was great and he definitely gave me certain directions on how he wanted the film to look. And I followed all his notes on what he wanted and basically what Dune was. I got more creative freedom when it came to working on the motion capture stuff. Motion capture. For what exactly? Who knows? It could be for the digital editions of other Sardaukar or other Harkonnen troops in what they do in the background. So he might have done some mocap work for those elements. He continues by adding that we had already shot 2 weeks worth of motion capture scenes in Los Angeles, which mainly consisted of computer-generated main battle sequences and included the dream sequence of Paul Atreides becoming a Fremen. So he's giving quite a bit away, and that's something refreshing. Again, this is the most we've heard of the movie since the trailer release, so it's welcome news. Other than all the news, of course, of the pushback and the issues between Warner Brothers and the filmmakers, etc. I imagine the motion capture Roger Yuan did for these dream sequences of Paul becoming a Fremen are for Fremen soldiers in those visions fighting Harkonnen or anyone who stands in their way in wars with a lot of skill. And this is where he had the creative freedom to do moves and add his own flavor to the Dune movie. Roger then says, at the time, Denis was with us overlooking the scenes that were being shot. He loved some of the sequences, even the one he shot for previs as a point of view. So that might make its way into the Dune movie. POV shots of the Fremen fighting and things of that nature for the audience. But then COVID hit and they had to stop shooting. They had already prepped for 2 weeks and they had another week to shoot in Los Angeles, but they didn't know when it was going to happen. So they discussed some various options with the producer, and at first they wanted him to oversee motion capture that could be shot over there in a studio used for video game performances, and he would oversee and give notes remotely while they shoot because of the COVID restrictions, but he basically said no, because he actually wanted to be there physically to guide the performers and to add any choreography to tidy up and bring it all together. And that's fair enough when you're trying to put your own stamp on the job that you have in terms of giving skills to other actors or to other stunt performers. You want to give them the best you possibly can in training, and it's very difficult to train someone long distance over video calls. It's just too difficult. You really need to be hands-on with those kinds of things. Like it's impossible to teach someone to wrestle from a distance. You have to grapple. So the other option that they had was to fly to Budapest and to film the whole thing live in full gear. The third alternative was to actually do it in Los Angeles, but at that point nobody knew when Los Angeles was going to open up for filming projects. So Denis basically said that he needed Roger to be there in person and he would oversee things through Skype and a remote camera. So this just shows how much this production was affected by COVID. Director Denis Villeneuve had to direct over Skype his stunt coordinator to help get this job done. So the difficulty over this production has been extraordinary. Roger Yuan then says Los Angeles opened up in June and they were ready to go back and they had their protocols in place. He then reveals that Dune was the very first film in America to come back into production right after the lockdown with COVID protocols in place. So they were really doing things by the book, safe, they were all tested, they were almost like a test case. Essentially lab rats, he says. But it's great. I mean, they were tested 3 times a week. Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Everybody was in lockdown, quarantined and not going out, so they were very strict with the cast and crew for safety reasons. So it seems like Dune was at the forefront of filmmaking during COVID protocols. That's an achievement in and of itself. There was actually a huge mocap team and Roger Yuan was the head of that team. So there's going to be quite a lot of mocap in Dune, probably for the battles, for the Atreides, for the Sardaukar and for the Harkonnen soldiers. Now, I am wondering whether or not Roger Yuan is linked to the Dune game that is supposed to be released, the unannounced Dune survival game. I definitely think that him and his team should be a part of it. On Roger Yuan's team is stunt performer Yesenia Kosio, and she will be playing one of the Fremen in Denis Villeneuve's Dune. You may have seen her on the Fox show Ultimate Tag as Dynamite. This is them training at 8711, the same place Keanu Reeves trained for John Wick 3 Parabellum. And of course Roger Yuan was in that movie. So the first week of production, they went back to 8711 into previous rehearsals and they started training with the new notes that Denis gave them. So they had to prep this piece, which was a fight sequence featuring Paul Atreides. That sounds to me like it's the fight between Jamis and Paul, because he would have probably mentioned Josh Brolin if it was a fight sequence for Caladan where Paul and Gurney Halleck fight with knives. So it's very interesting that he just mentions Paul Atreides here, so that could imply that it is actually the fight between Jamis and Paul in CH Tabr. They would film everything and show it to Denis digitally. So they'd shoot everything and then it would all go back to Denis that way. And something that Denis used to say was that, I'm happy if Roger's happy. And that's something really reassuring, because Roger says he really entrusted me to oversee these action battle sequences that's going to be in the film. So this shows that Denis given Roger the space to practice his skills and to portray them on screen in an authentic way. So Denis really wasn't getting in the way of this, and he gave Roger the space to create something special with the skills that Roger knows himself. A lot of the time, action sequences lose their magic touch because they're overly directed, overly edited, cut even, and you get just the bare minimum for screen and it's not shown off properly. So I'm really hoping that Denis giving Roger his space to breathe will show off some incredible martial arts skills on screen. But Roger himself really showed his professionalism in this moment, because he goes on to say, Denis is such a visual storyteller, and I knew that in terms of any piece of action choreography I would hope to introduce, first and foremost to take into consideration, does it serve the story? Does it serve the character in line with his concept and his vision? So it's really a collaborative process, and he was really trying to fit into Denis Villeneuve's vision and make it authentic and part of a realization of his vision. He then says it wasn't about how flashy he could make certain fight sequences or actors look, but rather how frantic, eye-catching and believable he could make this piece of action. So again, it's grounding Dune in realism and really trying to create something authentic. Roger Yuan got to train Josh Brolin and Jason Momoa for Dune, and so he's asked what training and direction did he give them and how well did they respond to it. He says that Josh Brolin was in LA preparing, and he had him start training in Cali with one of his friends. So that's really promising that Josh Brolin got to train in Cali, the fighting style. Then Roger flew over with Timothée Chalamet's stunt double to start training with Josh for about a week before he was going to fly over to Budapest, which is where they shot quite a lot of the Dune movie. But Josh had just had a baby girl right then, and Roger says that Josh was so close to sending an email to Denis to say that he couldn't do this film. He just couldn't do this film, which may have meant that we would have lost Josh Brolin as Gurney Halleck, and he probably would have been recast as someone else, but that didn't happen. So Roger says that his training fight with Paul at the beginning is a very intricate piece that flows from training to almost real fighting, so it becomes more intense, because Gurney is really trying to inject Paul with the seriousness that on Arrakis it's basically life or death. It's one of the most intense sequences, and Josh came through. Roger says he was brilliant and such a perfectionist, which is good to hear. Jason Momoa is a good mover. He's done a lot of fight sequences and he knows what he likes to do with swords. And of course we know that he's done a lot of weapon training, and I think one of the most recent things was C with his sword work there, which I thought was really great stuff. Roger likes to accommodate the actors according to their strengths and their weaknesses. So for example, if an actor has a bad knee or a bad shoulder, he won't let them do high kicks or overly use that particular limb, which is very practical. So this is why certain action sequences occur the way that they do. Sometimes you might ask yourself, why did they not kick high? Why did they not punch low? Or why did they not use that right arm? And it's because perhaps that they had injuries. But a lot of these action actors do push themselves and push through the pain. Something that springs to mind is Carrie-Anne Moss in The Matrix, where she sprained her ankle, I think it was, but she came back. She pulled through, she pushed through, and she delivered the performance that she intended to. Roger shows that his training technique is quite practical in the sense that he tells the actors that remembering a fight choreography is like remembering a phone number. You remember the digits one by one, you don't think of the entirety of the sequence. And that's a really sensible way of looking at memorizing fight sequences, because you don't want to worry about the entirety of the sequence, you want to get there one digit at a time. And he says how he trained Josh Brolin slowly in the movements, and then it gradually increased in speed, faster and faster and faster, until you get the desired movement at the desired speed. And Roger wanted them to have a flow and to feel like a dance. So Roger himself confirms that he hasn't seen the finished film, but that he's seen the trailer, some fight sequences, the visual effects are almost finalized, and it's looking really good from what he's seen so far. Roger says that some of the sword fights that Jason and Timothy have, and Timothy's and Josh's training fight, he thinks they perform them really well. And Roger reveals that he has a part in Denis Villeneuve's Dune movie. He says that Denis wanted him to have a part in the film because if the first one does well, which we all hope it will, and we complete the book, then he'll come back as a character called Lieutenant Lanville, and he has a battle to the death with Fade Rautha, which is in the book. Now in the book he isn't called Lieutenant Lanville, but there is a bold Atreides soldier that Fade Rautha fights in the arena. So a familiar face will bridge the two films together, because I think the fight scene between Lieutenant Lanville and Fade Rautha is going to be very early on in the film. In fact, it may even open the movie. So Roger is going to have some prominent screen time and become a familiar face so that we recognize him in Dune Part 2 when it hopefully gets made. So what do you think of all this information? Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks to Kung Fu Kingdom for featuring my video on fighting styles of Dune. You can check out that video if you like. If you'd like to read the full article, you can find a link in the description below. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and click the bell so that you can be first to be notified of new videos. And if you like these videos, you can support me on my Patreon or become a channel member, where you'll receive access to exclusive content, secret content, and more. Thank you, and until next time, see you soon.